In January of 2001, I was diagnosed with primary sclerosing cholangitis, PSC. PSC is scarring of the bile ducts. It's an autoimmune disease. It's got no cure, and it's very rare. And ultimately, over time, it kills the liver. Haley, my daughter, had just been born, and I was a very adventurous, athletic person that loved outdoor sports and biking and triathlon and surfing, and that diagnosis kind of transformed my life from one of feeling like I was going to live forever to one of milestones. And instead of thinking about my future and that, how long I was going to live, I started thinking about whether I would make my kids' graduation, milestone birthdays, their marriages, grandchildren, celebrating anniversaries and growing old with my wife, Ingrid. Everything changed in that moment.
Dad was always in and out of the hospital, and the thing about it is I never saw it affect his life. Yes, he was in and out of the hospital, but it truly never stopped him from living.
I lived with the disease since that diagnosis for over 20 years. The key symptoms were pruritus and cholangitis. Pruritus is a maddening symptom that just your whole body itches. It affects your concentration. It affects your happiness. It affects your work. It affects your family. You can't sleep. And there just aren't good therapies for it. And then cholangitis, which is basically infection and always resulted in hospitalizations. Neither happened at good times. They always interfered with something that was going on that was important. And there's a picture of us as a family at the beach, and everything looks great, except I hadn't slept in 5 nights. My skin was scarred from itching. It was very difficult to be happy, but all you could do was put on a face so that people didn't know how much it was impacting you.
I really didn't know how sick my dad was until my senior year of high school. I remember, hospital visits became more of a routine, and he was in and out even more. And it really was this moment of, Dad, how sick are you?
How sick was I? Soon I'd find that out. I was diagnosed with cholangiocarcinoma in September of 2020. And that same month I began chemo, radiation.
I was playing soccer at Texas Tech University, and I remember driving home from a practice one day, and my parents called me, and that's when I found out about the cancer diagnosis. And it was a scary moment, but it also was one where I don't think I felt the weight of it in that moment, because my sickness has always been something that's been normal. It was just another diagnosis, another thing my dad was gonna deal with, and I believe my dad would overcome this one as well.
I woke up that day and I decided it wasn't gonna change the way I live, so I went for a bike ride. And when I stepped outside, neighbors had signs on their garage door supporting me. It was really special. And it's actually where Super Dave was born.
Before my soccer games, while I was playing at Tech, my teammates came alongside me, and we would write Super Dave on our wrists. And Super Dave came from a little 3-year-old boy who couldn't pronounce Dave.
Dave?
Okay.
Dave?
That became kind of the slogan, the token for my dad's journey and support. It stemmed from, hey, Super Dave.
Every time I went for chemo, I went on a bike ride. It just was good for my mind, and I honestly believed it made a difference in just how I felt. The time after that, leading up to transplant, was a time where you really start to think about life and death, like your own mortality. And riding the bike became more important to me because it was during that time that I would get away and I would just be present with God. And I would talk to him about my future. So many things had to fall in place for me just to be able to get a transplant. The size of the mass, the location of the mass, whether it had metastasized, how healthy I was at the time. And once all that criteria was met, I would then be on the transplant list. And in February of 2021, I was listed. And that was a milestone.
The waiting began, and the waiting was filled with a lot of what ifs.
Well, I was told it would be about a month and a half. It was about 7 months that we waited for the call. And during those 7 months, my liver started to fail. And I started to see the symptoms of a failing liver, like ascites, which is your stomach is so distended that it's very uncomfortable. You get to a point where you're just not sure if you're ever gonna get the call. You know it. They tell you it's gonna come, and you're just sitting there saying, when? I began my first infusion of chemotherapy on September 14th of 2021, and exactly 1 year later, on September 14th of 2022, I received the call. To hear that news, the weight of what I'd been living with for 20 years just came crashing down, and the emotions were unbelievable, and the joy and the relief.
I immediately packed my things and got in the car to drive home. And I remember as we're driving home in the car, there was this moment that I remembered. This felt like exactly around the time that I had asked for prayer about a year ago. And I went to look at the text that my friend sent me of her team in our Bible study praying for my dad. And it was on September 14th of 2021. And it was in this moment that I realized it was the exact date, the day that my dad started chemo to now where he got the call was exactly 1 year apart to the day. And there was this peace that I felt that I couldn't explain.
So we got everything together and got to the hospital as quickly as we could. And then there was a waiting game of waiting to see if the donor in the donor's liver would ultimately be transplantable. That's an unknown. And once we received that green light and it was time to be wheeled in to the operating room,
we're moving. Bye. The games begin.
You don't know whether or not they're going to move forward with the transplant until they've opened you up and determined that you're transplantable and that the cancer hasn't spread. And so a lot of things had to still fall into place in order for the transplant to take place. And on September 15th of 2022, a life that had been lost so that I could live, somebody else's liver was transplanted, and I was given that gift of life. Post-transplant, it was all about stretches of good health, and I was like, geez, it's just as tough after it as it was before. My body rejected the liver 2 times. I had the flu, which led to a very rare anemia that put me in the hospital for 3 weeks. But I'm really happy to say now that it's just been a great stretch. In 2009, I qualified for the Boston Marathon. Being from Boston, I always said to myself that I wasn't going to run for a charity, I was going to earn it. And so I did, but I never ran it because I was diagnosed with kidney cancer. And it's got to where we are today, which is my daughter coming to me saying, let's celebrate life and go run the Boston Marathon and raise awareness for the American Liver Foundation and to honor the life that was lost so I could live. And how awesome is that? Well, one journey was behind us, a new journey was beginning.
On April 21st of 2025, my dad and I have the privilege of getting to run in the 129th annual Boston Marathon on behalf of the American Liver Foundation and getting to do it together.
We'd love your support.